I'm a 26-year-old British male, and I graduated from university about 2 years ago. Not long afterwards, I found a remote job as a note-taker. The job seemed simple enough. I would take weekly video calls with the client, jot down notes as he spoke about various subjects, and then send them to him for payment. The job description stated that the client was from Cairo and apparently worked in the IT industry. He wanted someone who wasn't necessarily knowledgeable about the subjects he discussed, but was able to confidently write notes in English. I assumed he worked with several companies who needed these notes and wasn't capable of translating them into competent text, or just didn't have the time. I applied for the job one evening, and within the hour, I received a call from an unknown number. Normally, I don't answer those types of calls, but I'd been applying to as many positions as possible, finding myself in a slightly strained financial situation at the time. I wasn't going to ignore a potential interview offer. I answered and a deep, gravelly voice spoke. It was the client from Cairo. For anonymity's sake, I'll just call him Eamon. He invited me to an interview on Teams the next day. The interview went well. Better than well, actually. Eamon was very friendly, and despite his deep tone, he had a good sense of humor. He gave me a sort of gentle giant vibe. He looked middle-aged, had a thick beard, and wore rimmed glasses. He barely asked about my experience, and although I'm not the most charismatic person, I felt that I'd won him over with my personality. On reflection, I realized that neither of these things ever mattered to begin with. After signing the contract and starting the job, I began to notice something about Eamon. He spoke slowly, slower than I expected him to. This made the job easier, but also dragged the sessions on far longer than necessary. I didn't mind too much. I was paid by the hour, so the longer the better, even if I did occasionally get a bit bored. Eamon would often stop the sessions to take a break for 10 to 15 minutes. His camera was always off and his sound muted during this time, which I didn't mind. I used it as an opportunity to grab a snack. When he came back on camera, he always seemed different, more relaxed. I could never quite describe it, but he spoke even slower. I assumed he might be on medication, or even drugs. Honestly, it was none of my business. I'd worked for him for around 3 months by the time Christmas rolled around. Every year, I traveled home to see my parents and grandparents. It was tradition by that point. About a day before I drove home, I received the most unexpected message imaginable. It was a screenshot, sent to me by email from Eamon. I had to blink several times to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. It was a single plane ticket, one return flight from London Gatwick Airport to Cairo International. At first, I was just confused. What was the context? Did he expect me to fly out to see him over Christmas? Eamon had never mentioned family once, but even if he had one, why the hell would he want me there? I was weirded out, but figured it must have been a mistake. There was no message, no title, no explanation. I assumed he had meant to send it to someone else in the UK. I replied within minutes asking if he'd meant to send it to somebody else. His response surprised me even more. It was firm but simple. "No, I didn't. Can you not make it?" I was definitely concerned. I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want Eamon thinking this was okay. It breached employer-employee boundaries tenfold. I let him know that, while I appreciated the gesture, I already had family plans, and it wasn't appropriate to buy me plane tickets to another country without even asking first. I expected a quick reply, but there was nothing. A week passed, then 2. By the time I was eating Christmas dinner with my family, still nothing. At this point, I figured the job was over. I was frustrated, but what could I do? The man lived in another country and paid me from one bank account. My dad found it incredibly strange. He told me I should check the contract to see if there was any clause about a no-contact period. If Eamon had broken the contract without a legitimate reason, I might be entitled to compensation. For the next week, I combed through the lengthy contract. Not much stood out. It was mostly legal mumbo-jumbo. But just as I was about to give up, I found something. A clause stated that the employer could cease contact for a maximum of 3 weeks without explanation. If broken, a fair payout would be deposited into my account, and the contract would become void. I was shocked this clause even existed. Why did it exist? The most interesting part was that the 3-week period was due to end the next day. So the next day I constantly checked my emails, hopeful he'd message me, but also hopeful he wouldn't so I'd get that payout. And exactly an hour before the 3 weeks were up, I received one. It was from Eamon. He apologized profusely, saying he'd been busy over Christmas and was sorry for buying the plane ticket without telling me. He claimed it was an early Christmas present, but realized it was in poor taste. He finished by asking if I was still interested in working for him. Of course I was. I needed the money and I didn't want to give up the easiest job I'd ever had. Eamon might have been odd, but I'd never meet him in person. He was harmless, behind a computer screen. When we jumped on a call a few days later, I was back home in my flat. The first thing I noticed was that Eamon was sitting in a new room. Previously, he'd always been in the same one. As if he could read my confusion, he immediately said he was in the middle of a move and would be staying in multiple Airbnbs to save money. I thought nothing of it, and our calls went on as normal. Our calls became less frequent over the next few weeks, 1 or 2 a week instead of 3 or 4. Each time Eamon was in a new room. Again, I didn't think much of it. Until something made my blood run cold. Eamon was finishing a discussion about cybersecurity issues. I was halfway through jotting down bullet points when he announced it was time for a break. I looked up at the screen. Unlike most times, when Eamon would turn off his camera before leaving, he stood up first, revealing the wall behind him that his body had been blocking. At first, what I saw didn't register. Then, just before the screen went black, I realized what it was. A Type-G socket. If you don't know, a Type-G plug socket is exclusive to the United Kingdom, meaning Eamon was not in Cairo. Eamon was in the United Kingdom. During the break, I double-checked online. Cairo uses Type-C and F sockets, not Type-G. I spent the next 15 minutes staring at the black screen, questioning whether I'd really seen it. When Eamon's camera came back on, I caught a glimpse again. It was definitely a UK socket. And to cement my suspicion, what happened next made my breath catch. My flat sits beside a busy road, especially at rush hour. It was about 6:10 when a car honked its horn. The sound immediately echoed through Eamon's audio and my whole body stiffened. Surely that was a coincidence. Seconds later, another honk. Again, it echoed through his feed. That's when I realized Eamon was staying somewhere near my flat. For the rest of the call, I forced a poker face. Luckily, it only lasted another 30 minutes. In that time, several more cars honked, and every time I heard them twice. As soon as the call ended, I sprinted to the window overlooking the street. I scanned every building's window, heart hammering. I couldn't see anyone. But then I realized the obvious answer. A small hotel sat across the street. I passed it every day on my way into town. That must be where he was. It had to be. Seconds later, my girlfriend came home from work. I hadn't mentioned her before because she hadn't been relevant to the story. But as she poked her head in, she could see something was wrong. I told her everything. She already knew about the plane ticket, which she'd found weird, but when I told her what I'd seen and heard, her face went pale. "Should we call the police?" she asked. I'd considered it, but what would I say? He hadn't committed a crime, all he'd done was stay in a hotel. As she tried to calm me down, the pieces began to fit together. For 3 weeks, Eamon had planned his route, booked his flights and hotels, all while moving closer to me. The only question was, why? My girlfriend said I was probably overthinking it. Maybe he'd come to surprise me or introduce himself properly. Perhaps it was innocent. That night I could barely sleep. Eventually, exhaustion took over. But what felt like seconds after drifting off, a faint sound came from the hallway, loud enough to wake me. I gently nudged my girlfriend awake and pressed a finger to my lips. She froze too when she heard it. It was the sound of the front door lock. Somebody was trying to pick it. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door. I already knew who it was. Anger overtook fear. Who did this guy think he was? I peered through the peephole. Nothing. Maybe I'd misheard. Stress and lack of sleep can play tricks on you. But no, my girlfriend had heard it too. I opened the door and looked both ways down the hallway. If someone was there, they were long gone now. The lock appeared to be untampered with too. I never normally put the bolt locks on, but that night I wasn't taking chances. The next day I was due to call Eamon. My girlfriend initially advised against it and told me I should now call the police. But I told her there was no evidence of a break-in. If we were going to prove it was him, then we would need to prove it. On camera. I tried to stay as focused and nonchalant as I could possibly be on our call. Eamon seemed normal, not like a man who had attempted a break-in the night prior. I had a burning rage towards him, but I used all my strength to hold back from snapping. That night my girlfriend and I were ready. I had placed a mounted camera on the other side of the peephole, from the inside of the flat, and I was sitting several feet away from the door in the pitch black. My girlfriend was in bed, though she told me firsthand that she would not get any sleep that night. Neither would I. I had a couple of energy drinks in my system, and I was gripping a thick baseball bat in my hands. If Eamon would dare try and break into my flat again, I would make sure he didn't get another chance to try it. Granted, I was half terrified, but like I said before, rage and anger was firmly holding the other half of my emotions. To my surprise, I would only need to wait an hour past midnight before I began to hear the sound of the lock being tampered with. I waited a few minutes, making sure that the camera captured as much footage as it could. Then, I slowly crept over to the door. I left the bolt locks off this time. I wanted to be able to unlock the door and catch him in the act. Whoever it was would swiftly get the bat to the head. That was the idea anyway. As I crept up to the door, my heart began to pound. When I say pound, I mean pound. It felt like it was on a treadmill. My hands began to shake and sweat, and the grip on the bat felt much less secure than it did a mere few seconds ago. I hovered my hand over the lock, mentally psyching myself up to turn it, but my hand wouldn't move. As my heart rate reached what I felt was its maximum speed, the lock tampering stopped, and it turned. You might think that in this moment I would have sprung to action as I watched the door open and a figure stood up just a foot in front of me. But I didn't. I just froze, and so did the man. It was a man, I could see that now, and it was definitely Eamon. He looked shocked to see me there, but he never once let out a gasp. He seemed to be in the same state of shock as both of us. But out of the two of us, I unfortunately have to admit, he was the first to snap out of it. He placed a hand to his face, covering what little he could, and searched with his eyes around the room desperately. I took several steps back, trying to control my breathing. I was furious at myself for not acting, but this was all too real now. I knew that if he took one step past me towards my bedroom where my girlfriend was sleeping, I would snap out of the trance. I almost internally begged for him to do that, so my body would remove itself from what comatose state of fear I was currently in. Eamon took 2 single steps into the room, and then paused. After a few seconds of fearful silence, he looked around the door and smiled. He grabbed the mounted camera off the peephole and waved it in front of me, still smiling. I'll never forget that look. In that moment, he realized that no matter what happened, he was getting off scot-free with the evidence. Even that wasn't enough to snap me out of it. And before I could utter a single word, he was gone. It took a full minute before I could move my body again. The blood felt like it was returning to my vitals and limbs, and I could finally breathe normally. I didn't even chase after him, I just closed the door and bolted the locks. I want to end this story by telling you that I am ashamed every day of not acting when I came face to face with this man. Every night I play the situation out again and again in my head. The initial confidence, then the fear that followed, and finally the immobilization of my own body. It makes me sick to think I acted like such a pathetic coward. Nothing can prepare you for moments like those. The worst part is that if it happened again, I fear the same outcome might happen. To clarify what happened and most importantly why it happened, well, after the event happened that night, me and my girlfriend phoned the police and explained everything. The police visited the hotel across the street and found nobody. Eamon had been confirmed to have already stayed in the hotel, having booked in a few nights prior, and had left that very same night, just minutes after he had broken into our flat. He had not used Eamon as a name. Instead, he had used a very English-sounding name, and had even provided fake ID documentations which were so well forged that they hadn't even flagged up on the hotel system. Whoever this guy was, he was a pro. I was able to show the police the list of all my bank transfers too, but they weren't able to trace any of the payments. The account had since been closed, making it impossible to get any trace. It wasn't until around last week that the police gave us some information that would change everything. Almost a year and a half on from the incident, Eamon hadn't left the United Kingdom. He had been staying in various hotels, using fake ID after fake ID to remain anonymous. He was getting away with it too. The police had more or less given up on finding him after a year, and he was put to the back of the cold case pile, assuming he had slipped through the cracks and back to his home country of Egypt. But then, Eamon had slipped up. The last hotel he had stayed in, unbeknownst to Eamon, had a daily room cleaning service. The hotel cleaner would knock 3 times at a specific time, and if the guest didn't answer and granted the door wasn't bolted, they would enter to clean. Well, it just so happens that Eamon was taking a shower at the time the cleaner entered. The cleaner immediately realized that she was probably intruding and went to leave. On her way out, her eye caught a glimpse of something so disturbing, she immediately left the room and reported it to the police. And the cleaner had seen the blueprint plans of what could only be described as a sex dungeon laid out on the bed. There were sketches of a room including various equipment and a figure drawn into several poses, attached and bound. But that wasn't what made her call the police. It was what was beside it. Pictures of a man taken of them through their window. The man was shirtless in some of them. Others he was walking around in just a pair of briefs. Some of the pictures were taken of this man in the street, amongst crowds of other people in public places. This man did not know he was having his picture taken. This man was me. hundreds and hundreds of photos of myself, beside a sketch of a location that Eamon had seemingly built for me. Suddenly, everything made sense when the laptop evidence came out too. Every single call that me and Eamon had shared was recorded by him. Hundreds and hundreds of screenshots had been taken of me from them. Hundreds had been printed out. During the breaks that Eamon had requested, I could only imagine what he had been doing. When the policeman told me all of this, I struggled to hold back the vomit that was building in my throat. This man had not planned to break into our apartment to cause harm to my girlfriend or to steal anything. He had come there to take me back to Cairo, back to what he had planned. Why did he not take me that night? I don't know, I really don't. Perhaps he saw the bat and figured I was too much trouble. Maybe he had planned to drug me in my sleep and me being awake was too much of a wrench in his plans. I don't know why he didn't do anything that night, but I know that I'm grateful he didn't try, because I don't think I'd still be here if he had.